Okay, so we usually have another song we're going to do. I think I'm going to actually save it if there's time at the end, because I have a really special speaker today, and I want to make sure that he has the right amount of time to speak to us today. So I want us to also remember that we need to be good listeners. We've been working on that in music class too. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we need to close those lips so that we can give our full attention to our speaker today, Mr. Alcala. Let's give him a hand. Yes. And I was going to turn it on. All right.
I thought they were on the ocean. No? And February Fun Week, you know what that is? You're supposed to go to my class, which is down this way where all the skeletons are, and you're supposed to bring me snacks all week. That sounds like fun for me. Wouldn't it be fun for you too? No. Okay. You can put that right up on the screen if it's up there yet. All right. So today I thought I would get a chance, I'd like the chance to talk with you about something pretty exciting. I think most people think so anyway. We like to talk a little bit about dinosaurs today. So you need to listen carefully, and especially you older students. This is really some questions you might have of your instructors. When you go back to class, you can talk to them. They have a wealth of knowledge. They'll be able to tell you all about all the different dinosaurs, Parasaurolophus, and all of those guys. So just ask your teachers when you get back to class, and they'll be able to inform you of all of those things. But the rest of us, here's what we want to talk about today. We're going to talk about 2 things. We're going to talk about the Ark, Noah's Ark, and we're going to talk about dinosaurs. One of the things that's kind of crazy, maybe you've read in the Bible that the people before the flood, that they lived a super long time. Now, I'm maybe kind of old to you guys. I'm right about 60 years old. But 60 years old was nothing to these guys in the Bible. Does anybody know? Put your hand up if you know. You can't put it up yet. I didn't even ask you. I was going to say, what's the square root of 412? See, you put your hand up. You have no idea. All right, so put your hand up if you know who is the oldest man in the Bible. What's his name? Let's see. What do you think? Not Noah. It's not Noah. What do you think? Methuselah. Awesome. How old was Methuselah? Anybody know? Yes. Not quite. 950 was Noah. Yes, ma'am. No. Okay, we could go through all of the numbers and up to 1,000. He was 969. 969. He's got 900 years on me. Now listen, they were 900-year-old people, but they didn't get old, at 80 like we do, and then they stayed old for another, 800 years. They were 900 years old, but when they were 500, they were like 30-somethings. They were like 35, 40 years old. They were really in their prime. In fact, Noah didn't even have his kids until he was 500. He was 500 years old when he had Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And when the flood came, Noah was 600 years old. So I'm going to show you some pictures about some things, and just wait, we'll get to the dinosaur part, but I got to kind of run through a little bit of information to help you understand something about dinosaurs. So here's some dinosaurs up there. We like this guy. Everybody likes him. Now, it stands to reason that because he's got those big old teeth, he probably scarfed on other dinosaurs. But I don't think so. I think he was eating Twinkies. Maybe. That's what we've been told. But that may not always be the case. Because even right now, do you realize that koala bears, they're bears, and they got a mouthful of teeth, and guess what they eat? Koala bears eat eucalyptus leaves. And panda bears, which are bears, and they've got big old teeth, they eat bamboo. They're not scarfing other animals, and they've got big old giant teeth. So just because they have big teeth doesn't mean that they're scarfing on other animals. They could just be eating blueberries. So where'd they go? I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer that question for you, but it surely is a question. How about this? Since God brought the animals to the ark, did dinosaurs get on the ark? Why not? They would eat everybody. That's only if you think they eat other animals. And they're so big, right? You go, I couldn't fit on the ark. That's because you think the ark is this little tiny tugboat thing with giraffes sticking their head out the window. Because that's what it looks like in all the nursery stories. And that's what people think, but that's not it. So we're going to show you how this could be. And where'd they go? So here's the earth. Let me go through this quickly. I know you older students, certainly, you guys, I've been hearing a lot of good stuff about you in elementary, how smart you are. So I thought, all right, we'll see how smart they are. I'm going to give them a little lesson and see if they can answer questions at the end of it. And you guys here in the front, let's see how smart you are, because I'll bet you are. So here's the earth. It says in the beginning, God created this. Right, you know, in the first verse of the Bible, there's no question anymore about evolution and creation. God knew that question was going to come up, so he said right at the beginning, here's what happened. I made it all. It didn't make itself. So the creation week has all of these events. And look where we are. We're down here at the end. God wanted to get everything ready for us right there for that week. And then on day 7, what did God do? He took a nap. Now, it isn't because this was so tough, because God can just go, boink, day 1, here it is. But what he was showing us was he was showing us how a week should be. And that for 6 days out of the week we work, and on one of those days we rest. And he says, I'm going to have this day of rest for you, whatever day that may be that we choose, but we take a rest and we honor God with that, just like he showed us to do. Sometimes I'm not very good at this. Some of you may know what we're talking about. But there we go. There's the creation week. Look what God said. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a story of how could people live 900 years, because we don't anymore. But this is it. So real quickly, God said in Genesis 1:6, I'm going to make this thing called a firmament between water above the firmament and water below it. So he divides the firmament, the waters, with this thing called a firmament. We go, there's no questions right now. So we go, what in the world is a firmament? It's between water, like a sandwich. It's got like a peanut butter sandwich. Here's this water. Here's this thing called firmament. We don't know what that is. Maybe it's really good jelly. And then there's more water down here. But he tells us, he says, God called the firmament heaven. And the morning and the evening were the second day. So we go, oh, this thing here in the middle is called heaven. Well, is that where you go to when you die? You go to heaven? Yeah. Well, let's see what he says. He's going to tell us again. So what does it mean by heaven? God said, let the waters bring forth creatures that have life, and the birds, fowl, fly above the earth in the firmament of heaven. So what is the firmament? Where birds fly. Where do birds fly? In the sky. So what is the firmament? The sky. So above the sky was water. And so I drew that with this line. And below the sky is water, like our oceans and stuff, right? So there's water there. And so when the sun comes to us like these yellow arrows and they strike this water, some of it bounces off. And some of it goes through, that's the little lines, and when they hit the earth, they bounce back and forth, and they make this earth a really warm and toasty and moist greenhouse where plants can grow big and luscious because they're food. Look at, before it rained, before it flooded, there was never any rain. Now, this is about 2,000 years from Adam and Eve to the flood. It never rained. This is why a lot of people didn't listen to Noah when he said, please, get on the ark and be saved. It's going to rain, and it's going to fill up the ground so much you're going to drown. And they're going, rain? It doesn't, what is that? It doesn't rain. Now, if I were to tell you tomorrow watermelons are going to fall from the sky, and they're going to it's a big, watermelons would hurt if they fall from the sky and land on you. And you probably wouldn't believe me because watermelons never fell from the sky before. And so I'm like, yes, it is. Please protect yourself. Get these concrete umbrellas I'm going to sell you. And so you could get your umbrellas, but you don't want to because there's no such thing as watermelons falling from the sky. But then tomorrow, I get under my umbrella with my concrete umbrella, and you don't, and it rains watermelons. And guess what? You can't live through that. So Noah probably was begging these people, but they didn't believe him because no rain. But how did God water plants then? How do you get water to plants if it never rains? It says in Genesis, a mist went up from the ground, the earth that watered the whole earth. You say, well, how could that happen? Well, look at some pictures. These are pictures that I got on the internet that just show places where the mist is. This is enough to water plants. Look here. Here's one close to home. Pretty cool, right? Yeah. So a greenhouse with the sun and this water vapor above us, and the plant life grew super big. Why? Because God said, this is all you get to eat, is plants. Look at. And God said, behold, I give you every herb bearing seed, and upon the face of the earth, and every tree which has fruit. He says, you're going to eat these things. Not only you, but every beast of the earth, and all the birds, all the creeping things that has life, they get to eat green plants for food too. Nobody scarfed anything. Big teeth dinosaurs were eating bananas because they were eating plants. They weren't eating each other. God said, don't do that. You're not eating each other, you're eating plants. Look at, I made this great big greenhouse for you to eat everything. But then after the flood, look in Genesis 9. The flood was Genesis 6 and 7. And the fear of you and the dread of you, God's telling to Noah, will be upon the beasts and every fowl and all the creeping things and all the fish. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. It's going to be your food. Anything that moves can be your food now. Why? Because after the flood, there weren't any more plants. The flood destroyed everything on the earth. What were people going to eat? The other thing that would happen, and I'll just be brief, this is you older students might grasp this a little better, is that we grow a certain height. We don't see people growing 20 feet tall. We don't see certain animals growing big because they have what's called determined growth. They're going to grow a certain height. But some creatures, they don't have a determined height. Reptiles are one, a lot of insects. You know, in the fossils, we find dragonflies that had wingspans this big. Imagine that, going around your pond, a dragonfly that big. They find ferns in the Arctic Circle where it's snowy that have tree trunks for their stems because they're so big. Because plants have indeterminate growth. They get big as long as they live. So if you live a long time, you can get super big if you're one of these kinds of creatures or life forms. The other thing that this would have done is would have pushed all the air down and would have made air super oxygenated. They talk about people being able to run 100 miles and not even breathe hard when they get there. They go, okay, where are we going now? Let's run another 100. No problem. So you could live a long time. You had lots to eat. The environment was super good. Everything was really nice. Lush plants, big plants, preservation. Everybody lived a long time, 900 years for some. Large amounts of life forms. But if you ruin this water around the earth, all this stuff stops. So what happens? Before the flood, people lived these ages, 900. Anybody know about Enoch? Look at him. He didn't live very long, did he? Only 365 years. Not very long, is it, compared to the other guys? You know why? 2 people in the Bible never died. Enoch, and who's the other one? No, Jesus died. Elijah. Right? Took him up in the chariot. So here's Enoch. And God says, and Enoch was so faithful, he says he walked with God that God took him and he was no more because he was so faithful to God. He didn't even have him have to die. Here's another one. Look at Noah's 950, but his dad is Lamech. If you do the timeline, teachers, he died the year of the flood, which is interesting. Because Noah probably got his righteousness from somewhere, didn't he? The baton was passed from dad to Noah, but look what dad's death number is. There might be something about that, huh? The perfect 7? Interesting there. There's our buddy Methuselah, and then Jared's next, but Noah's in third place for 950. So why do we die? Well, I'm going to kind of go fast through this. Maybe you older students, I'll come to your room sometime and tell you about this. Nonetheless, if you want to know why people lived long, if your cells can reproduce 50 times in your life, which is about right, and your cells live long, 20 years, because all those good conditions, adults out there, then you can live to 1,000. But if your cells are damaged because of the environment and things you're eating and all of that, and they live shorter amounts of time, you still reproduce the same number of times, but your total life is now 100. So maybe that can be something you could explain to your students with that. So here's where we are now. So after the flood, look what happens to the ages of people. Within 17 generations, we're down to 100 years after the flood. So something about the flood and the time before that allowed people to live long, whatever that might have been. Eating apricot seeds, maybe. Oh, that's weird. I don't know what happened there, you guys. Oh, nice. It changed into like some strange font. Okay, it doesn't matter. So what happens if you destroy this vapor around the earth? Well, you're going to get a lot of rain. People wonder, how could you get enough rain to cover the earth for the great flood of Noah's time? How could you do that? Well, what if this water above the earth already covers the earth, doesn't it? Here's the earth inside it. It's already enough water to do that. You break the canopy and it's not a greenhouse anymore. If you throw a rock through the glass of a greenhouse up in Michigan right now, the greenhouse gets cold. So the poles would get instantly cold as the water is shooting up into it from the geysers of the deep, unimaginable water, volcanic discharge, and it's going to come down as freezing cold blocks of ice and snow. What does that do? It does some interesting things to the wildlife for sure, and dinosaurs and such. So I'm going to go through this quickly. Maybe you couldn't figure out whatever font that I had. It looks cool though. All right, it didn't do it here. And look what happens during the flood. It says before the flood, it says, God saw that everybody thought evil. Every single thing they thought of was bad. And when you live 900 years, you can think some bad stuff. We call them the terrible twos. I don't know what we called 900s, right? Yes. So look, it says, every imagination of the thoughts of man is evil. And repented the Lord that he made him, and God said, I'm going to destroy man, who I've created both man and beast, and every creeping thing and the birds, because I'm sorry that I made them. But Noah found grace in his eyes. And so Noah and his wife and his 3 kids, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and their wives, 8 people, that's it, on the whole planet get saved. And they get in the boat. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come, the earth is filled with violence. Through them, behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And he says, this is how you're going to make the ark. You're going to make it 300 cubits. Now, if you hold up your hand like this, do this. From the tip of your finger to your elbow is a cubit. Instead of a foot or an inch, we measure with our arm. Because they didn't have a ruler there, and they just had their arms. Well, you say, well, my arm is bigger than your arm. So if I say, hey, 10 cubits, that's only if I want that to be, a big submarine sandwich or something. Your 10 cubits would be a littler one. Okay, so a cubit, though, is about 18 inches on average. And so look how big the ark is. God said to Noah, you're going to make it 300 cubits long. That's 450 feet. This isn't a little boat with the giraffes sticking their heads out. This is a football field and a half long, the size of an oil tanker. It's 75 feet wide and 45 feet tall. That's big. The ark would even be close to fitting in this room. About 5 rooms. This size, long. Okay, actually not quite that much. Maybe close. So that's humongous, because we got to put a lot of stuff in there. He says you're going to make a window in the top, about 1.5 feet tall, and then you're going to stick a door in the side, and there's going to be 3 floors, a lower, middle, and 3rd floor in the ark. He says, and I'm going to bring water to flood the earth, and it's going to destroy everything that has the breath of life in it. So if you breathe air, you're not going to live. Except for the 8 people on the boat. They got in the boat because they knew the watermelons were coming. All right, so what about fish? Do fish breathe air? In a way, but through gills. And so it's very likely that fish lived, a lot of them lived through this. They're in the oceans. So here God says, do this. Here's a little bit of a change, some of you. Just throw your hand up when I got to stop. So God says to Noah, he says, all right, what have we always heard? It's 2 by 2s, right? 2 by 2s. There's songs about that, isn't there? That the animals come 2 by 2. Guess what? That's not quite right. In the Bible, it says God told Noah to take clean beasts of 7s by 7 of them, and then unclean by 2s. 7, everybody, so that you can eat some of them and sacrifice some of them, and then have some of them to make more, and the unclean ones to make more. Noah is instructed to build the ark when he's 500. The rains come when he's 600, so it's 100 years to make the ark. 100 years. Can you imagine watching somebody out in your backyard making this thing a football field and a half long for 100 years, and watermelons are going to fall from the sky?
It's not watermelon, it's a flood.
Oh, yes, yes. No wonder they laughed at him. They thought he was nuts. He's a crazy man. He's crazy. And then what happens? The windows of heaven open up. God says, no more canopy. Snaps his fingers, or a meteor comes by, or anything. Doesn't matter. And the water falls to the earth, and water gushes up from the earth. This isn't 40 days of pitter-patter, little drizzly rain. This is Hurricane 5 times 100. This is terribleness. Earthquakes and volcanoes and eruptions and tsunamis and dreadful amounts of water going up into the sky that instantly freezes and comes down as chunks of ice the size of Volkswagen cars. It's not this little bit of rain happening. This covered the earth so much that the little bits of mountains, they hadn't really formed yet, the water was 25 feet above them so that when the boat went over them, it didn't get stuck. Everything died. All flesh died. Everything dies. Here's what it might look like. Yeah, here's some ideas from people. And those of you that have been to this, anybody been to the Ark Encounter? Some of you? It's very cool. Here's how big the Ark would have been. 522 train cars could fit inside it. And that would hold about 125,000 sheep. Now, sheep is an average size of an animal. And so you guys, again, you older ones might know that in order to get certain species of animals, one kind can make lots of them. A wolf can give you virtually every dog type on the planet. So God would have a pair of wolves come to make all of them. And with that in mind, there's about 25,000 kinds. So we can do doubles of those and more and have plenty of room when that's what we can hold. So food, the animals, even more people, there were plenty of room for more to come on. So when you talk about size of the ark holding things, this would have been sufficient. God wouldn't send the big ones. He's not going to send T-Rex full grown. Little baby T-Rexes. And whoever else, brachiosaurs and parasaurolophus and apatosaurs and all of those guys. I am. So plenty of room. So real quick, the dinosaur part, because I'm going to run out of time. So this actually talks about, there's people out there that don't believe this story. They don't believe the Bible. They don't believe this account, I should say. And so they believe in other things like that nature can produce all this stuff. And we call it evolution. And so they say, hey, the dinosaurs lived a couple 100 million years ago, and they died out about 65 million years ago. That's what we see in the fossils. That's why we don't see dinosaurs running around. They've been dead for 65 million years. And Little Petrie and Longneck, right? Those guys. If you notice in the program, there's no people running around. No people existed with dinosaurs. That's what they say. But watch this. One of those creatures that we find in fossils is a coelacanth. It's a fish. They thought that this fish died when dinosaurs died because they found its fossils with dinosaurs. And so they thought, well, this guy lived in shallow water. He's the thing that crawled up out of the ocean that became land animals. The coelacanth. He was a transitional species, lived with the dinosaurs. He died with the dinosaurs. Here's what he looked like in the fossils. Now, this is about a 6-foot fish, about this big. Okay, he's very cool. He's got these knobby fins that he can walk on, called a lobe-finned fish, Osteichthyes. And this guy, this is a fossil. But guess what? In the early 1920s, they started catching them off the coast of Africa in super deep water, not shallow water. No amphibianness with it. Here's one. Here's the actual ones they were catching. It's kind of hard to believe that this guy, which looks exactly like this one, is a fossil of representation of that because they died 65 million years ago. Well, here's a live dead one. All right, so here's the problem, you older guys. Either it's not right 65 million years, or there's no such thing as evolution because he didn't change from there to there in 65 million years. Older folks out there, they would say that humans went from a primate to us in the last 4 million years. And yet in 65 million years, these guys had no changes in them at all. So something's wrong there. Here's what they look like. Very cool. But extinct. How about this guy? In 1976, off New Zealand, they dredged this creature up out of the ocean, and he still has tissue on him. You might see his head here and the neck, front arms, back legs hanging down like this, kind of like Loch Ness Monster kind of thing, right? What is that? Yeah. You know what scientists call it? It's a whale. That's what they say. Now, I don't know if you want to call it a fork. It doesn't really matter what we call things, does it? If we all call it something. If I find this guy as a fossil in the ground, you can call it a whale all you want, but what does it look like? Looks like a dinosaur to me, too.
No, it looks like a zombie.
A zombie? Okay, we'll call them zombies then. I like that. Here's a mammoth. Mammoths died 100,000 years ago. Listen. Here's a mammoth picture of 100,000 years ago. Here is an actual mammoth baby in Siberia. He's got some of his tissue still on him. Here's his skull. Here's a front leg, another leg. They stuffed him, added some extra to him, and he looks like this now. Here's one. Okay, remember, these are 75 to 100,000 years old. Okay? In the mammoths, we find it's something like 70 of them now that have been found in Siberia and Russia, where they're still standing up with food in their mouth, frozen, dead. They didn't even have time to fall over before they were frozen, standing up. In fact, their tissue is so good that the dog sled teams going by, they cut off some of the meat on the back legs and feed it to the dogs. It's that good. And yet, super old. So probably not super old. Okay. Last thing, because I know you like this. Super croc. Off the Nile River in Africa, they have found skeletons of crocodiles that are this long. 40 feet. Okay, how could I demonstrate that? 40 feet would be about from that picture to the front row. That's how big he is. Super croc. Here's a replica in the Children's Museum in Indianapolis. I took this picture. Actually, don't tell anybody, but I snuck behind here. I went back here. And I got by the glass up here. I wanted to touch it. This is before cameras and stuff were, so I'm like reaching over. I couldn't touch it though. But nonetheless, really interesting thing in his nose. Here's what they say about him. They believe this guy was 110 million years ago. Says his nose is swollen, probably for smell. Go figure. I put some extra in here. Nonetheless, Super Croc likely spent most of his life in the river. Water hit his body. He hunted food. He snuck up on stuff. And wham, he gets them. And he chomps them up and eats them. He drags the stunned creature and he eats them for food. Well, look in the Bible. In chapter 41 of Job in the Bible, look what it says. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook or his tongue with a cord? When you let that down, can you go fish for Leviathan? This is God talking to Job. Can you put a hook in his nose or put a thorn in his jaw? Will he make little supplications? Will he beg you, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me? Will he speak soft words to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will he make promises to you? Will you take him for a servant? Will you play with him like a bird, like a pet? Will you give him to your daughters? Shall your companions eat him for a banquet? God is talking to Job, and he's kind of making fun of them, saying, look, would you do this with Leviathan? Because Job knows what Leviathan is. Can you fill his skin with irons or his head with spears? If you lay your hand on him, you'll do no more because you're toast. If you touch Leviathan, if you try to do anything to Leviathan, he will not be very kind to you. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall no one be cast down even at the sight? You see a 40-foot crocodile. If Leviathan is like that, you would fall over in fright, just like a zombie. It says, none is so fierce that dare stir him. Who is able then to stand before me? It says, who can open the doors of this guy's face? His jaw is like super crack. His teeth are terrible. His scales are his pride shut together. Does it sound maybe like a super crack? Perhaps. It says his scales are so near that air can't even go between them. Look at this. By his sneezing, when he sneezes, light comes out, and his eyes are the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps. God is telling us through the scriptures that Leviathan can breathe fire. Out of his nostrils goes smoke. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. He's a tough guy. He's Leviathan. I think Leviathan is this guy right here. So where did dinosaurs go? Can't tell you much about that, but we certainly have a lot of things that are dinosaur-like, and the Bible seems to talk about them. I have more examples, but we're out of time. So I appreciate all of your good attention. You guys were awesome. So thank you for letting me speak to you.
Can we say a big thank you to Mr. Alcala? I love that stuff. That's so awesome. Second and third grade, if you will go first before anybody else does, because they go straight to lunch. It's okay. It's okay. It's amazing that all of that wealth of information is right there in the Bible, in the Word of God. And I hope it just sparked some interest to just dive into God's Word and find out about these creatures and about how God created our world. All right, you guys have a wonderful, wonderful Tuesday.